Polls are a huge thing during election seasons, especially seeming to over the last month to 6 weeks, with the polls shooting up and down and reversing themselves, doing all that good stuff. Really, one of the things we need to understand when we're talking about polls is polls appeal to a very deep ancient instinct in the human mind. The idea that we want to know what the future is. And really, all polls are the inheritors of oracles and prophets. Now, they look fancier and they have the veneer of some form of science. There's math involved, but in all honesty, uh, it's really not a whole lot different. Now, to understand the complexity of polling and getting useful results, now let's imagine that over the next month, that you had the ability somehow, maybe you had a team, maybe you had some kind of automation, but you were able to talk to every eligible voter in the United States and ask them one question. And you pulled all your information back up and said X percentage said this, X percentage said that, et cetera, until you showed everything you got out of it. And I would venture to guess that the results you come up with would be very off. They would be off by numerous percentile points. In fact, there's a really good chance your answers may be the opposite of like in terms of who might win, you're going to get the opposite results than what you expect. At the very least, your numbers are going to be off by a fairly significant margin. And a lot of this comes down to understanding that first, it's impossible for pollsters to talk to a very large group of people. And the odd part being is the larger the group of people you talk to doesn't necessarily improve your data, uh, because there's a lot of eccentricities with dealing with human beings and their opinions. So they get into issues of trying to extrapolate samples. You talk to 1,000 people, if you talk to 10,000 people, how do you take this number and apply it to the rest of the population at whole in a way that makes any kind of sense at all? It's very difficult to do. So a lot of what happens is a poll will be taken, and then when it's all said and done, they'll take a look at those numbers based on reality, i.e., after the election, and they'll say, "Oh, okay, we see, we're off by X amount in this area, Y amount in that area, et cetera, et cetera." So now they have to figure out how they reweight their system to get a better answer. So let's say your poll was off by 9 percentage points in the negative. Well, in theory, you could just say, okay, well, we'll just add 9 to the next poll. And some pollsters do something almost identical to that. And very frequently, it doesn't work. So what ends up happening is they have to create data modeling. It's part of the reasons why you ask demographic questions, because you find out very rapidly that not every answer is equal. And by uh, weighting certain groups and subtracting from certain groups, nerfing and buffing, you come up with an answer that might seem to work. But one of the big problems with data modeling is just because it works doesn't mean it worked for the right reason. So, for instance, if you come up with a model, fix your last year's data and say, aha, this is what we did. You go into the next election and it seems to work. And then you'll find out that the election after that, it won't work at all. Because just because you're able to turn the numbers around and make them match closer to reality doesn't mean you pick the right variables to fix. And this is typical where you see cycles where a particular polling agency seems to become a favorite for maybe one or two, maybe three election cycles. And then all of a sudden, they can't seem to make anything work from that point on. Now, one of the major assumptions is that the goal of polling is accuracy. And this is a very unfounded assumption. Uh, you have to remember that polls, some polls that are being used on a routine basis, have literally polled badly for decades, meaning they haven't really got good results hardly ever. They're still used. Quite often, polls are used to drive and suppress information generation. Uh, Polls are used to drive and suppress campaign contribution. Polls are used to drive and suppress turnout. Uh, the part of our brain that wants to believe what's presented to it. It's that part of the brain Jordan Peterson talks about when somebody tells you up in that clump of trees there's a lion, that evolutionarily it's smart to believe them because uh, being wrong in this case could end your life. So people tend to want to believe the information presented to them. And the more effort that seems to go into the presentation, the more credibility it has. However, polls are just as susceptible to any other type of informational influence. Just as we can look back long distance in time and see that there was a certain veneer of credibility to news media, one which very few people apply now. Similarly, they would have applied it the same thing with polls. Oh, look, there's numbers, there's graphs, there's a guy in a suit with a pair of glasses, looking very mathematical and stern, telling us, yes, this is what's going on. But the problem is because this is information that can influence the way people act and think, it's just as corruptible as any other information. Not meaning all polls are lies, but they have the potential to be. Now, one of the things I talk about in some of my other videos is something I call the big boy polls. Now, this is something that most of us have never seen. Uh, it's possible you might see derivatives of them, but you're never going to see them directly because we're talking about polling companies that provide polling directly to the campaigns. Now, if these guys are ever wrong, they don't get hired again. So these guys are the ones who actually get reasonable answers. And if they do get something wrong, they actually explain the best of their ability how they got them wrong. Uh, these polls are worth millions, probably tens of millions of dollars, the amount of money gets pumped into them. Because so much money is made directly to the campaigns, uh, it's essentially it's a proprietary process. So these polls and their methodologies are not going to be directly given out to the public. Uh, they're basically going to protect their proprietary information, and they're even afraid of giving out interim samples where they say, "Oh well, let's show how things are really going on in Pennsylvania, uh, with the albino population." Well, if it turns out to be accurate and everyone realizes it's actually part of a functioning data set, you could actually tip off some of your proprietary capabilities. So it's rare. Okay, you aren't going to see these, and if you do see anything, they're going to be derivatives, and you're not even going to realize you're seeing the derivatives. They're going to look just like any other poll. Another thing to keep in mind with polling is that it has aspects of marketing and advertising. I mean, when I say aspects, I mean it's a critical component. Um, for example, uh, when you look at how questions are phrased, what questions are asked. These are the marketing and advertising aspects of it. Because uh, depending on what answer you want to get, do you want an accurate answer? Or do you want an answer that you have a preferred outcome for? Changes the way you would word these questions. And if you understand anything about psychology, it's not a straightforward game to uh, word the questions the way you want to get the results you want. Even if you're looking for accuracy, if you're looking for accuracy, you still have to have the question crafted in such a way that it is absolutely neutral and doesn't lead in any way whatsoever. So, what you need to be doing primarily is pretty much ignoring the polls. They're not telling you useful information. They are trying to get you to act a certain way. So, how do you find out what might be going on with the big boy polls? Well, the easiest way is look at what the campaigns are doing, what the candidates are doing, what their proxies are doing. For instance, you'll very clearly see particular messages will pop up and they'll get repeated all over the place. The question is, how long do they keep saying that message? If the message pops up and starts disappearing rapidly, that's an indicator the big boy poll is telling you this isn't working. And vice versa. If you see something that gets used and it starts being built on and built on and built on, you know that it's having an impact. Things you want to look for is, are they making public announcements of staff changes? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the polls indicate that their strategy is way off. Uh, Making a staff change that everyone can see is in itself a form of campaigning. Um, it's a way of, okay, let's say you have a plan where it's a 3-step plan, and your goal when you change from step 1 to step 2 is you want to have a clean break from it. And let's say that step 1 is the nasty phase where you're just savaging people. Well, there's a reason why you might sack your campaign staff going from step 1 to step 2. It's the way the candidate is uh, trying to send a message saying, "Oh, well, that wasn't me, that was them." But it could have been the intent all along. Where it's like, okay, yep, you guys are gonna play attack dog up until phase 2, and at that point, either somebody else is going to be inserted, or you're going to be stepped down, or you might just be publicly fired but still retain your post in order to basically tell everyone, okay, yeah, you know that's just this campaign season stuff. That's not me. Um, and also just kind of look at the channels of communication, where what ideas are being communicated where. I mean, obviously, your main channel right now is social media, what's going on in TikTok, what's going on X, to a lesser extent, what's going on in YouTube, and then what's going on in dinosaur media. These tell you what's going on. Basically, you need to judge them by their actions, not what they say they are doing, especially when you start hearing things like where, oh, the campaign is really upset with this particular thing. That's deliberately leaked by one side or the other. Campaign is going to have absolutely buttoned down internal information in terms of what's going down. So, to sum up, the main thing to take away from polls is, don't let it influence you. You can use things to educate yourself, but don't let the emotionality of things drive you. Ultimately, you shouldn't care what the polls are saying. Uh, it should be up to what you think is best for you. I always remember a weird little story when I think it was 6th or 7th grade, and I maybe 6th grade. I think it was the Broncos and the Cowboys were playing in the Super Bowl, And I remember telling this one girl, well, I'd really like the Broncos to win, but unfortunately, Dallas is going to end up winning. And she was very confused by this. How could I be rooting for the team that I didn't think was going to win? And this always struck me odd in my mind because that's not the way I think. It is impactful enough of a memory that I can remember it even at my age now. And then I realized over time, there's a lot of people like you really shouldn't care about being on the winning side. You really should be voting for the candidate that you think is going to have the greatest impact on you, even if that means not voting at all. So, in the comments section below, do you have any observations on the polls over the last 6 weeks that you think are interesting? Do you agree with my assessment that for the most part, polls are not telling you useful information? If I'm wrong, tell me how. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithms brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, please look at my other titles and consider subscribing. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.